So anyway, so this little example, again, shows you how to read in lists of numbers and turn them into a two-dimensional list. And this shows how to print them out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this in the chat session. So you can fork this and this will make your life easier. Any questions? Actually, what I'm going to do too is let me name this. Let's call this two-dimensional. Wait, if I can just spell. Man. I'll get it eventually, two-dimensional example. I'm going to save this and then I'll post it to the web page too. All right, but I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, so you can look to find that as an example. All right, so let's go back to today. That example will hopefully help you a lot with chapter 8, section 8 or whatever homework in the REPLs. Okay, today is kind of hands-on, and what I want you to do is open up a REPL and I want you to follow along with this. Okay, so classes revisited. Okay, so let's talk about classes a little bit. Python provides features that provide object-oriented programming, including the ability to define new types or classes, which we saw in the POJL class on classes. It's not easy to provide a crisp definition of object-oriented programming, but we've already seen some of its characteristics. Programs are made up of object definition and function definitions, and most of the computation is expressed in terms of operations on objects. Each object definition corresponds to some object or concept in the real world, and functions that operate on that object correspond to the way real world objects interact, right? Like a student, we can do things, we can store information about a student in a student class, in a student object that's of a student class. And then we can do things like, add them to, put them in a dorm, register them for a class, assign them an advisor, allow them to pay their tuition, all sorts of things like that. Okay, so let's look at the overview of some of the terminology that we've seen. A class is basically a user-defined prototype for an object that defines two things: a set of attributes that characterize the objects in the class, and then a set of methods, things that we can do to the class, right? Again, when we define a class, we say two things. Here are attributes, which we store in variables, right? Like in atom, we stored number of neutrons and atomic weight and other things. And then we had things we can do to them, right? Like compute the number of moles, I guess. I don't remember what all the functions were. But so we have, again, an object has two things: the stuff we store in it and the things that we can do to it. So a class variable, remember we talked about that at the end of last time. Well, actually we didn't really talk about this, but we're going to learn about it some more. Class variable is a variable that is shared among multiple classes, multiple members of that class. And so we're going to see an example of that. An instance variable is any variable that is associated with each instance of a class. So each student has their own GPA. Each student has their own telephone number, right? So that's an instance. A class is something that everybody shares. For example,